blah. So even if you consider France, it was originally Britain and separate regions which spoke separate languages, separate cuisines. Napoleon had to force them together by force to become a nation state, and now they're proud of their French word, which is ridiculous anyway because they were in French a couple of hundred years back. So essentially the whole concept of nation state itself is meaningless, much less the concept of EU. You need to think bigger, is my point of view. If you read anyone from like Chomsky or Vidal or even Kurt Vonnegut, the identity as a member of a particular nation is kind of obsolete, should be made obsolete. Apart from that, even in terms of what makes you Europeans, essentially, if you, so I guess this is also, I think, Badiou, is Alain Badiou on social capital. So essentially, the social capital, the definition of what constitutes social capital in one nation versus another is one good metric for proximity or measure of what unites one group of people. And of course, there's a huge difference between Americans and Europeans in that sense. So I think there is sort of an identity you can form amongst yourself if you want to have a weak support for a European Union, if you need it. But I think we should evolve to a state where we stop looking at nation states and look at a bigger organization. I guess against your 2 points which actually had an emotional impact was, are you willing to give money for a particular nation? Having lived in 3 places, I've contributed to the economy of all 3 nations. Would I be willing to die for them? I won't be willing to die for anyone in terms of war, because as Asimov said, violence is the last resort of being competent. So I just would love to hear your responses.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, nation is meaningless, and we should think bigger. This sounds wonderful to me. And I already mentioned I would like to be a citizen, call myself a citizen of this world. This is opening a completely different window of togetherness and sharing. And then I look to a part of my world that we tend to forget, and this is Africa. And then a complete different story is opening. But we have no time to do this today, and maybe some other time. But I stress that the normative view that you are proposing, and that I share, is meaningless when we ask people. And it's people that matter. In a democracy, it's not the elite and the wise emperor ruling, but it's people. And people feel along national identities. Still do, whether we like it or not, but we cannot make politics, we cannot change the world without meeting people where they stand today and trying to move along together with them. And that's my point. The French example is wonderful. I love that, because there are two... okay, stay with the French. My wife is a French teacher, and we are friends and travel extensively. And in Martinique, for example, it's the children, grandchildren of slaves from Africa. And this is visible. But in their school books in Martinique and Guadeloupe, there is the Gallic people, our ancestors. And they're singing the Christmas songs from Paris. Then they never saw their French citizens. And France is denying the existence of a difference between nation and state. And there's just one other country in our vicinity that is in the same way strict, and this is Turkey. Denying. We always talk about nation-state, but nation and state are not the same. And forcing it to be the same means extinctive nationhood that differs from the state borders. The Kurdish people, they are a nation. They are scattered over 4 states. In Belgium, we do have 3 nations, and they're fighting each other. I have quite a few contacts to Belgians. So, and after after 3 glasses of wine in the evening, the most intellectual people start to hate the others. I agree. Nation state is not the same, but the identity is with the people, and we must meet the people where they stand, not where we want them to be.
Can I respond?
Yes.
So the idea of, like, you say democracy in voting, as in the example of in the US, people don't often vote in their best interest. That's point number one. And the more metaphorical example would be, it's asking the different legs of a caterpillar whether it wants to be a butterfly. You never get a butterfly if you ask for a vote.
Okay.
Could I add one thing? Because this nations have different preferences thing, that actually many people take as a rationale for the Europe of nations. And, what I don't like about it is that preferences vary within nations, you know, and especially on European topics. There's not such thing like a German preference. You have different opinions in each nation. And so sometimes I feel closer to some even UK people, especially as an economist, because they are very open-minded, not protectionist at all, they're for competition and all that. And then within Germany, there's people that are much more protectionist. But now you make, and it's also always stated, you know, UK is very free trade oriented and stuff there. In the UK you have protectionist people. In Italy you have free traders. I mean, so what I'm saying is sometimes I feel it blurs our perception of the true issues at hand. And sometimes if we don't like the outcome of a majority procedure, then we say it's undemocratic, or it's not what my nation preferences tell me or something. You know, it's majority ruling, and sometimes you're the minority, you have to accept, and that's hard. And EU as a scapegoat, Commission as someone you can blame for everything, I think it's part of this story.
Could we not, I mean, the troubling thing for me to look, you know, looking at the European Union today is that we tend to think, conveniently perhaps, that sort of the drive back to the nation state is something that makes the European Union impossible. But in fact, one could argue the opposite, namely that the renationalization is precisely the product of Europe today and as it's handled. And you know, I want to second what Martin was saying. It's not only the Troika, but ever since the Euro crisis hit, what we've seen is European leaders, 2 or 3, in the beginning with Merkel and Sarkozy. It was Merkozy. It was 2 people getting together in summits, in a string of summits, and deciding everything. I mean, we've just seen last week images of 3 European leaders on an airplane carrier, you know, off the coast of Italy, discussing it and making decisions about what's supposed to happen after Brexit. So, you know, I mean, the crisis of legitimation goes far deeper even than, I mean, you know, people think of the European Commission as an all-powerful institution that somehow regulates everything from, you know, how bananas are supposed to look like to everything. Well, that's not the case anymore at all. I mean, it's become almost as toothless as the European Parliament has always sort of been and been considered. So, you know, I mean, to what extent is this drive we see currently, and the rise of xenophobia and the rise of right-wing terrorism and so forth, how is it then not sort of the product of the very European, you know, practices that we see today? So I think, for me, that's what's really troubling. And the Euro crisis has pitched nations against one another, and of course it's not Germans against Greeks. It's there are very rich people in each of those countries, and there are very poor people in all of those countries. And I find it very problematic how within the European configuration it's come to that we somehow pitch again nations against one another. So I find that problematic.
I'd like to comment on the euro crisis because the euro crisis makes a big difference, because so far European integration has been about finding a common set of rules concerning the single market. That's basically what's been. And what it has not been is distributing resources, which we do in each member state. But as I told you, 1%, that's the size of the EU budget. That's nothing. That's not really, also, of course, some, but to such a small amount that's not really what characterizes European integration. Now, with the euro crisis, that has changed. Now, we do have a no bailout clause in the treaties, and so what we needed was some assistance to prevent the whole monetary system from collapsing. The ECB did its share, overextending its competences a little bit for my taste. But then also it was about the question that my colleague had already raised. Why should a German taxpayer pay for Greece's problems? And it's been, especially Greece, which is other countries been involved. Greece is a really hardcore problematic case. But if you look at it, they've been spending too much. Debt was just too high. They've been lying about the debt situation when they entered monetary unions. And now the German taxpayer should pay for it. Well, if he does, then of course it's Angela Merkel that defines the conditions and the conditionality of these payments. And of course there is no democratic ruling of the Greek people, do they want to cut expenses or not? They have to. Without the German money, they would have had to anyways. So it was an emergency assistance, not covered by any EU institutions. And so EU institutions also don't play a role. In that case, I really say, the European Council, but actually the countries, it's what the countries were willing to do. Then also these country leaders make issues about it, make decisions about it. And I don't see a lack of democracy at that point.
You were first in Martin.
So thank you both for being here. This is really enlightening. As an American, I'm automatically drawing bridges to what's going on back at home with our election. It seems that the whole Leave campaign is very similar to Trump's campaign, and even voter turnout for Leave, more rural areas versus staying in cities seems to be the same as in America. Is that just part of a greater worldwide phenomenon going on with xenophobia and the issues we're facing with the migrant crisis and big government versus small government? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I tried to refer to this briefly before, stating that now we must face the fact that the development of the last 40 years economically produced winners and losers in regions, in countries, in social strata, qualified, less qualified, female, male. There's so many structural changes going on, and groups in society are losing. And they are getting angry. They're not xenophobic in the first place. They are either losing already or being afraid of losing. I read quite a couple of studies on this Pegida movement in Germany, people marching and being xenophobic and so on. Xenophobia is not the first point. The first point is being afraid and being angry. And especially Thatcher and Reagan invented those nice slogans like "the tide lifts all boats." Let the rich and the super rich get richer, and everybody will profit sooner or later. Yeah? And before we had class wars, we talked about exploitation of workers. And then the Social Democrats did away with all this struggle, and the middle class emerged, and now the middle class is drying up. So we are in a shift in globalization that is changing the social fabric of societies. And this is emerging in this type of unrest. And we must find an answer to that. And I think European integration is under a bad name nowadays because many people think that bloody guys in Brussels taking care of bananas and not of the real problems. Yes, that's right, but why? Because the European Treaty is assigning tasks and responsibilities from the nation state to Brussels. And beyond this mandate, except Draghi, beyond this mandate, they cannot act. And so the most pressing problems that are popping up nowadays, the financial crisis, the refugee situation, the slow economic growth, and the end of the hope for prosperity for all of us. Brussels does not have a mandate, no instruments, and no budget for tackling this. So I think this referendum should ask the question, what do we want to do together, and what do we want to do locally? And we should restart assigning tasks to Europe like border, security, inner and outer security. We do have 16 IT systems of the police in Germany alone. And those 16 systems cannot communicate. We have 28 member states. It must be paradise to be a criminal in this environment. And borders are open. So we have so many problems to solve that we better solve on a higher level. But Europe doesn't have a mandate, and what we should do is sort out functions and you saying this needs to be mandated on a higher level and this stays local. And the banana story, if you give me 3 more seconds for the banana story. And I'm supporting your point of the blame game. There is, beyond bananas, is this cucumber story. The European Union, the Commission made a standardization of the cucumber's curvature. Okay. Are they crazy? No, they are not. The European umbrella organization of vegetable traders approached the Commission saying, we need standardization in vegetable trade because it's a pest to have all those countries with no or different standards. How can we trade? We need standardization. The Commission said, yes, we understand and made a standard for cucumbers. And from this on we are saying, oh, they are silly, then bloody guys in Brussels, they are making cucumber curvature standards. And then, because this was a example that everybody knows, and I'm still approached with these cucumbers or bananas every evening I talk about Europe. Yeah, that's true. And they scrapped it 3 years ago, and who protested loudly and violently? The European Umbrella Organization of Vegetable Traders.
What happened to weighing the vegetables? Isn't that more important than the curvature? Is that,
I'm not an expert in cucumbers.
The logistics of transport actually makes it easier if you can pack them.
But let's leave the vegetables aside. We'll come back to your question. We can make a connection to the US elections in 6 weeks when we come back here, reconvene, have a similar panel on the US elections on the eve of the election. So make a connection. Martin, you're pitching.
So even though I think it's talking about cucumbers and bananas is funny, I think it's actually a little too serious. And I think this is exactly the problem. That this is a nice story we can tell, and this is what everyone gets. But as you said, we should get into other ways of getting information and understanding the real issues. And the problem is that there's such a Eurospeak already that just lawyers, for example, understand what is the real deal, for example, TTIP, and also where they are not even sharing what's really going on. But what made my heart really beating is when you said, should the German taxpayer pay for example, Greek? And I say, yeah, because there is nothing like the German taxpayer. I mean, the taxations you can get are from the people who cannot get into some, tax paradises and something. So the question is, yeah, there are some Germans who should pay even, because they made a lot of money out of greed. With the help of Deutsche Bank and Goldman Sachs, they even bet with derivatives on going down, and greed is going down. They made a lot of money. And the bailout we did, it saved mostly German banks, for example. Nothing really went straight to Greek. And if you think about that we are in the European Union where Greek families now have to bring their children to social welfare companies because they can't afford anymore to give them food and everything in Greek. So yeah, they should pay, because there are some very rich people. And it's not so much about Italy against France or Germany, it's about very, very rich people in every country of Europe who are getting more and more out of this situation, worldwide, also in America. And this is the real issue. We have the wealth defense industry, which makes it really hard to get it. But there is the money. It's not a lack of money. We don't have to save anymore in social welfare systems or whatever. That's one point I wanted to make, which made me really angry. And another question I have, and you mentioned Piketty, and I was wondering that you not really went deeper into that. And you said the proof of the pudding for economists is mind. And I see in the level of economists very, very small debate about what is money anyway. So you said it very straight and you made wonderful calculations and theories on that, but if you go really into the question, what is money? If it's such a proof, if it's so important that even people die because you want that to pay back the debts, what is money? What is money? And I would like to ask you that. What is money for you? I hope the answer you will give is something that convinces and makes me hope for you.
I think respond.
Yeah, what is money is a long debate. And we share the skepticism and the frustration with economics in general. So I'm very, very bad opponent to your point. I'm rather with you in this respect. I would like to pick up your Greek example. I went often to Greece guest lecturing, and I have friends in Greece and so on. So I'm very much attached to this country. And so, but what I see is, and you mentioned interestingly the term social capital. Yeah. Putnam's point. Huh? So social capital is zero in Greece. The state is my enemy. I cheat wherever I can. I protect anything in my family, and I rob everybody else. This is very lousy social capital, and it's due to history. And I understand why, and so on, but it is a fact. And if you talk to people in Sweden, they pay high taxes. There's a very little propensity to cheat on taxes. And they trust each other, and they trust their institutions. Because from birth, from cradle of kindergarten to your grave, the state is paying back on you, is giving back for your tax money valuable services. So this is an extremely high social capital. And the Greek problem can never be solved if their social capital stays zero, but we cannot impose social capital. This needs kind of a redevelopment of this society. And this was a side aspect. And coming back to the Greeks being poor, yes, it's catastrophic. But why? Because, and I support your point, I looked into the data, I looked in many analytical papers, academic papers that took a serious approach. And the common finding is German surplus. I brought my money to my savings and loan association, and they gave it, but I wanted a return. I wanted an interest income. So they had to earn money on it. So they brought it to France, and France brought it to Spain and to Greece and to Portugal. And we brought it to Greece directly. And we made money on it. And then they needed refinancing, and they had a prosperity. They started from being on 50% of the European level GDP per head when they entered the European Union. And they shot up on borrowed money to 75 to 80%. This was prosperity. It was a wonderful life. It looked nice. And I traveled to Kavala, and every time I traveled, my friend and colleague picked me up from the bus stop with this old Opel, and everything was broken, and he brought it as a student from Freiburg when he went home to become a professor in town. And then he came with a brand new Golf, and everybody in town had a brand new scooter, and the restaurants were full. And I asked, hey, what's going on here? And the answer all over the place was, credit is so cheap.
But that's not different than Germany or any other country. We all
The only difference is that the sustainability of debt is given here and is not given there.
It's not, sorry.
Not in the long run, but it still is. So the Greeks overspent. They had a big party for 8 years. And when the German money,
talking about party, having a party, I think this is a wrong term.
This is, in my perception, when the state is taking on high debt and distributing this into a extremely blown up public service, paying very generous wages. This is a party, in my perception. If you take the money to invest it, to earn on it, and being able to repay the credit, then this is a different story.
Doesn't the debate between the two of you right now to beg the question,
Okay.
who thought it was a good idea to have Greece and Germany sharing one currency? I mean, we can of course make arguments about morality, parties, all day long, but the question is, doesn't the euro, the very introduction of the euro precisely make the kind of scenario you're mapping out, a logical outcome? How, Sweden, I was going to say Sweden, but Sweden's using the kroner, but who thought that this was a good and sustainable idea? And the euro, which was agreed to by the German Chancellor in the early 90s as a token of, we'll work together with you, we don't want to dominate the continent, we're not a hegemonic power, we're not interested in dominating this continent. Precisely that's what happened. So the decision about the Greek debt crisis is made in Berlin, a few miles from here. So
In Paris, I guess. I suggest a different capital city.
okay,
If you don't know.
sure. I mean, we know the differences in the approach of the German. Those of you who will be in the finance in Rogers class, you will hear on Wednesday how the German Federal Reserve differs from Draghi's position, of course. But okay, still, the fact remains that the euro itself is conducive to fostering the kinds of things that we're seeing. So, I mean, that's for me the real question, and not sort of Germany versus Greece. It could be, we could find other examples.
What we do also
Milka, do you want to interject?
I wanted to ask, actually, because we were discussing that, I mean, there are many economic reasons why the European Union has been there and has been there for so long. But, I mean, I've been doing a lot of research on the EU so far, and my impression is that it has been highly political decision to create the European Union, not really economic. I mean, and because you said that, yes, because we wanted to prevent wars at the beginning, but then later, I mean, why? What was the reason to accept